We are going to talk about today's topic, judgment. And I wanted, before we kind of dive in and get all kind of practical with ideas for action, I thought we'd do a bit of thinking together. Given that sort of the last week's podcast was on sort of time to think, let's take some time to think together. You can think on your own, and you can write down your notes, or you can think with us and share your thoughts in the comments, whatever works for you. But I have a few questions to get us started on this topic of judgment. First of all, when we are thinking about judgment, when you are thinking about judgment, what does it actually mean to you? Like when we kind of worked hard to come up with a definition, but when you're thinking about judgment, like judgment at work, what does it mean to you? Like if you were to kind of go, judgment is ... what does that mean? Oh, nice, Ada. Head into chat if you would like to, or just think about it for yourself. Thanks, Sam. Whether the decisions I make have a good outcome. So judgment in Sam's mind, good judgment, there's a decision. So like I'm committing to something, and that decision kind of has the kind of the positive outcome that I intended. I like it. What else? So decisions again, Lucy, making good decisions. Going quick now, everybody. I've got to catch up. Good decisions with the information I have available. Quite like that, Lucy, as well, because it's sort of like I can only base it on kind of what I know. Like I have to work with what I know. Interesting, and as I usually associate with criticism, negative judgment. It's interesting, isn't it? Because your framing affects your feelings. So if we're thinking about judgment being a negative thing, it might kind of get in the way potentially. It might be a bit of a thinking trap for us developing that skill. So I think when Sarah and I are talking about judgment, we're thinking about how do you use judgment to make better decisions, about your development and about your work more generally. What have we got here? iPad 2, categorizing things, people, anticipating things. That's interesting, using judgment to anticipate things. Good decisions coming up there, Jamie. Marie also kind of making that negative kind of connection, like judgment, I'm being judged. It is interesting. Quite a few people actually making that connection. I didn't that connection, but I do think it is interesting, just on that framing and feelings thing. Like if we think of judgment as being judgmental, that might affect us sort of positively developing that skill. It might just be something to kind of hold in your head if that's what we're doing. Loads of stuff. Okay, next one for you. Again, up to you if you want to share this. On a scale of 1 to 10, how advanced do you think your judgment skill is? Like, do you think you're good at judgment? Basically, like how skilled do you think you are? What we got here? We've got some 5s, 6s, people hovering in the middle. Lucy's got a confident 8. I love a confident score. 7 to 10. Sam, Inez. Okay, generally I'd say we're like 5 and above as a group. I'm not seeing anyone who's like, my judgment's appalling. 1. Generally. That's interesting. In my old age, Caroline, I like experience is a better framing. Caroline says, getting better about old age / my experience. Is that, I mean, you know, Lucy's point earlier that it's using the available information. Maybe some of that available information comes with experience. So maybe your judgment does improve over time because you've got more experience, you've got more information. I don't know, but I wouldn't want us to go, well, then I have to have a long career in order to have good judgment. Like we'll talk about some things that can maybe accelerate it, because again, that could be a bit of a thinking trap. I still think you can have good judgment without having experienced the situation before. Maybe Jamie says past experience might give you the confidence to trust yourself. So maybe it makes you trust your judgment more. Yeah. Okay. Now I want you to kind of think in your mind, and again, you're welcome to share this, but I think it could just get a bit more personal here. I want you to think of a kind of an example for you of when you think you've had good judgment. So if you think back, when do you kind of go, on reflection, I had good judgment in that situation? So yeah, you're happy to share because it will help us contextualize this a little bit. Like say, for example, I think I had good judgment when I left Microsoft to do Amazing If, even though there was a lot of risk with that move, financial risk, like career risk, a whole load of risk with that move. I look at that on reflection and I go, I had good judgment in that moment, and maybe have a think about, well, why? I think I took time. I talked to quite a lot of people. I had sort of risk recovery plan. Like that, when I think about that particular decision, I believe it was good judgment, and I can see why it was. So kind of just have a think in your mind. When do you think you have had a good judgment in the past, and what do you think contributed to it? So Steve has had good judgment about people. That's really interesting. Kind of recruiting people, really like being able to make that call quite quickly. Maybe kind of Steve's a good sensor, maybe. Lucia taking a leap into the unknown. So you've had good judgment and dealing with ambiguity, Lucia. That's interesting. Genevieve as well when recruiting, a bit like Steve. Moving roles, Natalie. Changed internally, Shilun. Resigning. Okay. So it's kind of personal reflections, but I kind of want you to hold that, like, A, know that you've had good judgment in the past, and B, kind of like what was contributing to it. Now, I'd like us to think about bad judgment. Again, you do not have to share this. I just want you to have it in, I just want to have it in your mind. Like when you think, yeah, that probably wasn't the best decision I've made. And it can be like personal, professional. Please do not feel you have to share this. But I want you to hold that thing that happened in your mind a bit, where you think, on reflection, I didn't have great judgment about that situation. So, you know, kind of one of mine would be, I was working in a high pressure environment for a high pressure person. And I think how I managed that and sort of my judgment about that situation was a bit off. Like it was a bit off. I probably should have gone and got help sooner. And, you know, there was just lots. I think my judgment about that situation was entirely off on reflection. And the reason that I want you to think about that is I would love you to try and understand, and you might need to reflect on this after today, to be honest. You might not crack this in the 30 seconds I'm giving you on PodPlus, but what was the difference? That is what I care about. You've had situations where you've had good judgment. You've had situations where it's not been so great. What made the difference between those moments? Because if we can understand that, that helps us to almost work out our kind of poor judgment patterns and the kind of decelerators to our judgment, like the things that sort of detract from our good judgment. That is a very personal reflection. We all have different things. So Vivi saying time and reflection made a difference, not trusting yourself. Lucia, so maybe a bit of sort of self-doubt creeping in. So maybe confidence is a contributor to a lack of good judgment. Yeah, Andrew, this is similar to mine, actually. Andrew says, I jumped out of a company and into another one far too quickly without doing proper due diligence and planning. I did it because I wanted growth, but I jumped into a company that didn't match my values or non-negotiable. That's really, really honest, Andrew. And I think a lot of people, me included, have done that. One of my, I'll get to that quote in a minute. Where's it gone? Oh, I'll get to it in a minute. But one of my kind of poor judgment patterns is trying to solve things too quickly. Like if I look at my judgment in the past, I'm like, this isn't working. So I jump to something else, a bit like you have done, Andrew. And I haven't necessarily spent enough time sitting in an uncomfortable situation. I'm just trying to jump from one to another. So that like need to resolve things fast is kind of one of my poor judgment flags, really, I suppose. Okay, so useful for us to get a bit of insight. You might want to take some of those questions away, because kind of that's like the groundwork for this skill, to be honest. We've got to like work out some stuff in terms of where we're starting from in order to build a bit better. So you might want to take some of those reflections away. Sarah and I got to a definition. So what did it mean to us? We always try to make our sort of definitions for skills as simple as possible. So we got to good judgment is about using smart thinking to get to sensible solutions. So the smart thinking is you're drawing on data, you're bringing in some evidence, maybe a bit of gut feel, but we thought that good judgment, you don't want to just rely on gut feel. There's probably some other bits of information you want to get to, and it's sensible solutions. So that's what we got to. Obviously, it's got a bit of alliteration in, but it didn't come from me; it came from Sarah. So she brought the alliteration in on this one. But that's the definition that we went with. And it's also useful to reflect, and I've seen this a little bit in what people have shared. Where, in terms of your work at the moment, where do you rely on judgment to get to these sort of sensible solutions and outcomes? So we came up with a number of P's. I say we, this was Sarah again. She mocks me for my alliteration, but she contributed quite a lot to this script. So pace, in your work today, maybe we'll do stars on screens actually in a minute. Let me go through them all, and then maybe we'll do stars on screens. So pace, do you have to make judgment about the speed of the work, like speeding up, slowing down, stopping things? Is that part of how you use judgment on a day-to-day basis? Priorities, are you regularly using your judgment to reprioritize your workload, like what you do first? Purpose, are you using your judgment to work out sort of the why behind the work. Like, why are we doing this? How does this work take us towards this thing that we're trying to do that's bigger than today? Are you using your judgment about people? So like Steve mentioned this, if you're recruiting or if you're managing people or you're thinking about how you give feedback, are you using judgment to do that? Problems. Are you faced with quite a lot of problems? Are you firefighting all over the place? Are you using your judgment to tackle those problems? Is that something that's part of the work that you do? Possibilities. So, quite a few people have mentioned they're thinking about new roles or new positions. So are you using your judgment to work out what the best possibility is for you right now? Or this was tenuous. This was a tenuous P. Pounds. Are you using your judgment to like manage budgets and stuff like that? Like, how much money do we allocate here? Is that part of your role? So these were some of the common ways we thought judgment kind of came into our working weeks and our days. Out of interest, which one of these P's feels relevant to you right now? So in terms of you using judgment at work, which one of these P's feels relevant to you right now? We're going to use stars on screen. So new people, if you go towards the top of your screen, you will see view options, annotate, stamp and star. Lucy from the team has put that in chat for you. So all these people that are putting stars on their screens, they're doing it by going up to the top of Zoom, view options, and then annotate, and then stamp, and then star. And the question is, which one of these P's feels relevant to how you're using your judgment right now? Let's see if there's some people are messaging privately. You're on it. I love it. I'm going to add you a manual. If you can't make the stars work, you can always let me know in chat, and I will put it on there for you. I'm just catching up with a few of the comments. Does judgment always need to lead to good outcomes? Yeah, I don't think good judgment always leads to good outcomes, because I think there are sometimes some factors that we can't predict. We'll talk about it a little bit with one of the ideas for action, about playing it through, which helps you to do a little bit of prediction, but you're not in control of all the factors, right? So I think good judgment does not necessarily always mean good outcomes. I think it does mean that you use smart thinking to get to a sensible decision. What happens next isn't always in your control. My perspective on that question there. Oh, what have we got? Anything here that we feel like we're doing? Priorities, maybe. I'm just going to try to work out from the maybe priorities and people feel like the ones the way we're using judgment the most. The reason I think it's important for you to know which of these P's feels very relevant for your use of judgment right now is because I really want you to spot your poor judgment patterns. So for example, if your P is priorities, it's worth thinking, okay, well, what are my poor judgment patterns? So for example, for me, if prioritization is one of the ways that I'm using judgment quite a lot, the fact that I have an undoable to-do list every day, not that helpful. Like, I should probably just pick three things. Or if people are a way that I'm using judgment, I might want to think, when in the past has my judgment with people been a bit off? Because you want to kind of spot how you're using judgment and then try and spot your poor judgment patterns. It just makes us a bit more sort of conscious of our incompetence, possibly, so that we can get better. That's the plan. We talk actually next week on the podcast. If any of you come across the conscious incompetence kind of model, it's on the podcast next week. If you haven't, you'll learn about it next week. I thought I saw another question. I have a question, says Katie. How do people use tools? Oh, okay. This is how do people use tools for Amazing If? I don't know. I'll let you all answer that, because I don't know how you're using them, but I'd love to know how you're using them. Let's talk about some ideas for action then that might help us to improve our judgment. We've kind of worked out, we've done a bit of groundwork on like the sort of foundational stuff of this skill. We've talked about definition. We've talked about when you're using it. And we've talked about kind of like how we might be able to start spotting our poor judgment patterns. So now let's focus on improving our judgment. What do we need to do differently? I think the first thing to do is to ask yourself some accelerating questions. So when you have got one of those decisions, when you think I need smart thinking to come up with a solution, there are some accelerating questions you can ask yourself, which will help you to gather a bit of that data, a bit of the kind of insight and information that Lucy was referencing. So the first question, really useful to ask yourself, is what have I learned from a similar situation before? So it is likely you've done something like this before. You've made a decision a bit like this, like you've moved jobs before, you've given someone feedback before, you've been overwhelmed by your workload before, unfortunately. So what did you learn last time is a useful way of getting a bit of data. You don't have to look at every situation fresh. We've probably been here and done that. So before you go forward, just take a moment to sort of look back and gather a bit of data. Also useful to think about, but what is the number one priority right now? Sometimes when we are faced with a decision, we can get distracted by other stuff, like sort of noise, the amount of things we've got to do, my need to just get it done regardless of like whether it's the most important thing. So it is useful to be like, okay, if I sort of zoom out from this situation, what actually is the biggest priority right now? And then also just useful to pause, like, what am I missing? What don't I know? What insight would be useful for me to get? These are really quick questions that you can ask yourself that can give you a lot of that data to inform your decisions, to kind of give you a better sense of your judgment. So useful to kind of have the accelerators in mind. There are 4 of these actions I'm going to talk about. So the first one, ask yourself accelerators. The second is do a speedy sense check. So think about who in your career community is going to be good at you kind of giving you a bit of fast feedback on what your thinking is. And this might be like different people. So for example, if Sarah, my lovely business partner, Sarah, she's very good at doing a speedy sense check on people stuff. Like if I'm thinking about, well, how do I approach that person and should I ask them? Sarah she just, I think because she's an empathetic thinker, she sees things from other people's perspectives very quickly. So I can always do a speedy sense check on anything people related with Sarah. Whereas actually, some of the people that I might talk to about sort of money related decisions or thinking, I've got some mentors that are outside of my organization that are very responsive and very good at sort of giving me quick feedback on money related stuff. They probably wish I didn't do it all the time, but they are very good at it. And so have a think about, for these different ways in which you use judgment at work, who would be a good speedy sense checker for you. So these people, they get your context, so they can kind of quickly get up to speed, and they are responsive. So if you ask the question, they're going to come back to you. So I think just have a think about, they're not just nice people, they get your context and they respond quickly. That's the right people. Again, you're not reliant on them to make the decision. You're just running your thinking by them, and they can kind of come back to you quite quickly to inform it. So do a speedy sense check. The next one is to play it out. So when you are making judgment, it's likely, as it's come up for lots of us, it's about a decision. It's moving roles, it's putting yourself forward for a project, it's doing something different. You almost want to play it through. So don't just make the decision in this moment. Try and think forward. I came across a useful model that we didn't put in the podcast actually, but it is in the pod sheet. It's used in therapy, apparently. It's the 10-10-10 model. Don't know if any of you come across it. But what you do is you kind of think, so if I made this decision, so I might say, if I made this decision to move to this new company or to become a non-executive director of a business, how would I feel about that in 10 minutes? So like emotionally, would I feel comfortable with that decision, or am I still feeling a bit uncomfortable about it? How would I feel in 10 days? So think forward, or in 10 days, I'm going to have to reorganize my diary. I'm probably going to have to say no to some things to create time. Like how would that feel? And then do like 10 weeks. So in 10 weeks time, that would be like part of the way I was working. Then what would my work look like? Like just go forward basically from the moment that you are sort of making this judgment-based decision in, so that you can consider a few more factors. That was that one about, does good judgment always result in good outcomes? Don't know, because you can't control everything, but this sort of helps you think it through. I think of it sort of, it's a bit squiggly scenario planning. It might just help you think about any data points that you might have missed, which you might want to kind of think it through. Oh, I like it too, Rachel. If only I'd put it in the podcast. It is when we like read about these stuff afterwards, like your kind of bias for information, you start to see more things because you've talked about it on the podcast. But yeah, I find that useful. Obviously, you can change the time frame. You could make it 10 days, 10 weeks, 10 months or whatever, or 10 years. It sort of depends what the framing is. The point is, play it through, like think forward from the moment. And then last but not least, reduce the risk. So even with all the data and the playing it through in the world, it doesn't always mean that your judgment is going to result in the intended outcome. And there are some things that we can do to reduce the risk of our judgment going wrong or resulting in unintended consequences. So the first thing is communicate your known unknowns. Like, I would be really confident if you're making a recommendation to somebody, or making a decision at work, I would talk to people about, well, this is what I'm thinking we should do. There are some kind of gaps in terms of my knowledge that I want to be really clear about, because that means if it doesn't go the way that you want it to, you have clearly and confidently communicated the known unknowns. So it's not like they're going, oh, Helen completely missed that one. How did she miss that? I think owning what you don't know is as important as communicating what you do. It is a confident thing to say, I do not know the answer to this, but I still believe this is the best way forward for us. So communicate your known unknowns. Also, watch out for your red flags. So what I mean by this is, let's say I make a decision. I'm like, okay, I'm going to apply for a new role. And I'm going to go for some interviews with a company. That feels like the right thing to do. There might be some red flags for you, like in the interviews or the way that your manager responds, or it's sort of like your red flags along the way. Work out what those red flags are, because you don't want to continue with a decision regardless. Like you don't have to go, I've this is definitely what I'm going to do and I've got to stick and see it through. There are sometimes there might be some red flags along the way that make you think, maybe that wasn't the right decision to make. Maybe my judgment wasn't quite as good as I thought it was. Work out what those red flags might be. It's very specific to whatever the thing is, but if you can think, well, if that happens, then I might need to relook at this, then you're just giving it a little bit more attention and it reduces the risk. So this is a summary. This summary is obviously summarized a little bit more detailed on the pod sheet, so you can get that from the website. But I think this is just a really sensible cycle, to be honest. If judgment is smart decisions get to sensible solutions, I think this is a sensible cycle to follow whenever you might have a decision that you're going to make, and your judgment is very important to the outcome of that decision. So that's everything. We are at time, everybody. I hope that has been helpful.